No, it's going to be a great back and forth conversation between the two of us, full of life, full of inspiration for our audience, and I'm really looking forward to it. And
Me,
let's go.
yeah, me too. Absolutely. So I always begin our conversation with something that I think hopefully we can get over and we don't have to talk about it anymore. But the pandemic was such a big deal. 5 years ago, we were really just going through the changes. How did you get through that era, and how has it changed the way that you do things today?
Yeah, that era was definitely a huge eye opener and a shift because I worked in corporate world for 11 years during the pandemic. I was in retail sales environment and really just kind of in a bubble. I was really good at my job working in telecom at the top of my game. And one of the deciding factors of the pandemic was this whole thing of being locked in. And I was like, I don't want to be locked in ever again. I want to be living somewhere where I manage my own schedule and where I'm not working for somebody else's vision. I'm doing my own thing. That's part of the reason why I'm a resident of Mexico now, resident and citizen of Mexico, is because I was like, I was in a country in Canada, that's where I'm from, where our lockdown restrictions were insanely over the top, just like super controlling. And I was like, I don't want to be ever caught in that situation again. And I pivoted. I pivoted to leave my comfortable career to become a digital nomad and to run two of my own businesses. And even though the pandemic was difficult and hard, I'm thankful for the boiler that it was for me to really build within me that resolve that I had to just go out in the open road and explore life because life's too short to have regrets.
It almost seems like that time can be termed the Great Awakening. I think all of us, in very personal and professional ways, realized we were at this existential place in the road and we had to make a decision for the rest of our lives.
Agreed. 100%. I'm right there with you.
So let me ask you this. It's very clear based on what you said, what you do right now. But if you had to boil that down for a bunch of 12-year-olds at a school on career day, and one of the kids wanted to know what you do for a living, how would you explain it to them?
I'm a motivational public speaker that helps individuals reach their unique design and purpose because all of us have a purpose in the world. And that unique purpose is the in between, the white between the letters on the pages of our individual book that's being written every second of the day. And helping people reach their design, it's what I do.
So, what did you want to be when you were 12 years old? What was your dream job?
Well, my dream job was to motivate and encourage people. Like I was a talker from a very young age, so one of my nicknames actually was TTM. My friends would call me talk too much because I really, really love this whole concept and this language of inspiration through verbal communication. And one of my first audiences actually as a 12-year-old before people was my stuffed animal collection, which I still have in my basement today. It's in bags of 120 stuffed animals. And I would practice as a teenager speaking to my stuffed animals because I knew that one day I was meant to inspire people in live audiences and talk to them about something. I didn't know what I was going to be talking about quite that yet, but it was starting to come into really alignment of I'm meant to speak, I'm meant to inspire, I'm meant to guide and instruct. And my stuffed animals became part of my first audience. And I just want to throw that as a tidbit out there for anyone listening that, if you're looking for an audience to start with, everybody starts with the stuffy, and it's a really good place to start.
Absolutely. So, take me back to your beginnings in Canada. What were the seeds that were planted early on that made you want to motivate and speak to people and get people in that place to change their lives?
That would be, I was born and raised in a homeschooler environment with me and my two older brothers. We're about a year and a half apart. And now, currently in the present day, we live in three different countries. I live in Mexico, my middle brother lives in Canada, my oldest brother lives in Paraguay. But we were all homeschooled. My mother homeschooled us. My father was involved too, but he worked during the days in the 9 to 5 corporate world. But my mother was very involved. And we were taught to be creators and entrepreneurs and change agents from a young age. And part of the shift towards, okay, motivating people, what's this going to look like, is when I was 18 years old. My mother thought it'd be a good idea for myself, my father, and my brothers to be able to see the world through a different lens. Because being in the West, we are very much sheltered in this Western culture of privilege and wealth and decadence. But until in my perspective, until we actually see the world, especially the underprivileged parts of the world, we don't have a complete picture. And my mother thought it'd be a very good idea for myself to get out into some of those places. So East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, and the Philippines were some of the first third world countries that I started exploring. And we went there and did a lot of public speaking, motivational speaking, preaching, teaching, and helping orphanages, Bible colleges, churches, humanitarian efforts and works as an 18-year-old, and it forever changed me. My first real audience outside of my family was Africa when I was 18 years old, speaking to orphans, speaking to Bible college students, and eventually speaking to government dignitaries and multimedia radio talk show hosts as well too there in Tanzania. It was an incredible shift coming from a homeschooling environment, but this is where I was like, okay, standing in front of people in a foreign country where every eye is upon you and there's no place to hide. For a lot of people, public speaking is one of the number one fears in life. For me, it was the opposite. It was pushing into excitement. And that's really where it began for me.
So, as somebody that motivates and persuades from stage, what's been the best speech that you've ever witnessed? Who has done that on stage that you've witnessed that's been inspirational to you?
I would have to say my one of my good friends, mentors, he's passed on now many years ago, back in 2013, 2014, I believe. Now it's crazy how time flies, but
Yeah.
his name was John Paul Jackson, John Paul Jackson. And he ran a ministry called Streams Ministries, Streams Academy. It was a school of dream interpretation that I went to. My family helped bring his ministry to Canada as well as helping him in his work in the United States and around the world. But he was one of my mentors. And seeing him from the audience and seeing him on stage speak and inspire in a very practical but mystical, spiritual way were things that I never forgot. And one of the lessons that he taught me individually is a one of the final pieces of advice he gave me that's still sitting in my email, my old Hotmail account, my old Prince Charming account, my cheesy name that I have, a Hotmail account that came up from the old Shrek cartoon. For those of you who see Shrek, I love Shrek.
Yeah.
But the email sitting there in the inbox is one of the final pieces of advice that he gave to me from his years of experience of teaching and inspiring audiences from the stage, online, on YouTube. YouTube was just becoming a mainstream thing when he passed. But he talked about this lesson, and this lesson is this, Caleb, beware of covenants, contracts, and agreements, because they will dictate the course of your life. And that was a lesson that he would often speak of from the stage, but he specifically sent to me via email when he was giving me kind of some parting words advice when he was in the latter years of his race on Earth. And it's something I've never forgotten. But John Paul Jackson, definitely the most inspiring teacher from the stage that I can come across with.
So, when you look at heroes in your life, would you say he's been that? Who has been that consistent hero or inspiration for you to find your voice, to move and to be where you're at today?
For sure, John Paul is definitely one, but I would say even looking back into the history books, sometimes when we look at human beings, heroes, we think of this concept that they have to be alive or at our time in history to be a hero. And of course, John Paul, when he was living during my time on the earth as a mentor, he was definitely a hero for me. But one of the heroes, one of the main, even great heroes as well, too, that I've often looked back to is Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman from the United States history, runaway slave on the Underground Railroad, and her story of following her dreams of the night season that she had while she was escaping slavery from south to north, from Maryland to Pennsylvania to Canada and back again, and leading many runaway slaves to freedom is one of the most inspiring heroes that I have in life that I learned about as a young boy in the homeschooling age, at the age of 6 years old, starting off from that age all the way to a teenager and keeping her story and many other stories like her, men and women of history and in the scriptures, close to my heart. But Harriet Tubman has been one of those main heroes in my life that if she can change her environment, because that's what we're all called to do at some point or another, to reinvent ourselves and change our environment. If she can change her environment and get out of that toxic environment to be able to push forward as a leader, to see the link that's speaking to her in her life, how much more can we? But Harriet Tubman, she's been definitely one of my main heroes.
So if you could meet anybody alive on the planet right now, or see somebody speak that might help you on your journey, who would you love to witness or talk to?
Probably want to speak one-on-one with Joe Rogan on a podcast. I would love to pick his brain, be a guest on his show, and really engage with him because I remember, and you probably do, Joe, from just seeing like Joe Rogan's X Factor,
Yeah,
the X Factor, or the Fear Factor, not
yeah.
X Factor, Fear Factor, and this silly show where he was the host of this show where people would eat all this disgusting stuff or do all these stunts. But seeing Joe Rogan from Fear Factor all the way to being a podcaster for me, because I'm still old enough to remember when he was on that show as a host,
Yeah.
it's such a crazy turnaround. And then to see how healthy he is and how he looks after his body and how he believes in a lot of these things that are cutting edge, even with mainstream, and how he challenges mindsets and ideas and brings these guests on his show that are controversial. I just love how unconventional he is. He would be somebody for me that I would love to learn from and sit in front of for sure, Joe Rogan.
So moving from your home base of Canada to Mexico, was what was that process like? Were you nervous? Were you elated? What kind of feelings did you have going from one continent to another?
Mm, I would say it's a combination of all of the above. And I think, I believe that if you don't have nerves, if you and I and our audience doesn't have nerves from something like this, of doing a major shift from one environment to another, from one career to the other, if we don't have goosebumps or butterflies, then we don't have a pulse. For me, I had some nerves, but I had a lot of excitement because it was a shift from one season to another. I felt like I had run my course in the corporate world in Big Corp for 11 years, and it was time for me to explore. So I knew the time was coming because of this principle that's in the book of Chronicles, and it talks about the prayer of Jabez, the prayer of Jabez, and it talks about expanding his tent, asking God to expand his tent and his reach. And for me, I knew that I had to expand, and I do need to expand my tent and my reach. And that if I stayed in a 40-hour week in the corporate world in an office, doing sales, something I'm very good at, but not moving and expanding my tent into the nations, into the world, and using my talents and gifts, I'd be leaving a lot on the shelf. So I was excited to transition from Canada to Mexico, to sell the house in Canada, to leave the comfortable career, and to go into life as a digital nomad, because that's part of my DNA of design. Like I was raised, as I shared earlier, as a homeschooler, but as an entrepreneur at a young age. At the age of 13, my mother ran a 20-year landscaping business in Canada, and me and my brothers worked for her long hours, for everywhere from 8-hour days to 15-hour days, in front of some of the wealthiest clients like Murray Edwards, owner of the Calgary Flames, Jim Shaw, one of the telecom giants, the two telecom giants in Canada, Telus and Shaw, but owner of Shaw Cable and Burnco, and all these clients that are just very wealthy, but at a young age learning how to manage wealth. For me, it was a no-brainer to shift because I'd reached my point of, okay, the pandemic, I feel like I've capped myself in the big corp world. I even presented a solution that I ran by people higher up than my boss in the telecom world, saying, hey, I have a plan to be able to go 6 months in Mexico and 6 months back to Canada and kind of do remote online work to drive sales traffic to the many stores that my boss had in Western Canada. A plan that I even vetted with many executives, many CEOs and executives higher up in the telecom world. They all said this would be a no-brainer. But when I presented it to my boss during the years of the pandemic, even coming out of the pandemic, he said, "Oh, Caleb," and I remember this, and I just can't believe that someone would have a mindset like this. But unfortunately, there are dinosaurs. His perspective was, "Oh, Caleb, online sales just doesn't work." And I just stopped. I was like, "What are you talking about? This
Yeah.
is the way of the future. We are in generation resign, generation reinvent ourselves." And I knew at that point that my boss, that I'd served for 10 years, been one of his top salespeople, done all the trips, traveled, won all the awards, that 10 years of service in that company, that my individual design was not going to be celebrated moving forward. I was just another cog in the wheel. So that was the finishing final blow and final nail in the coffin. It's time to move. And Mexico was part of that. I had my escape hatch and I knew that I was not going to go back.
So, what is the energy for you every day to wake up to do this work that you do, to motivate clients, to take care of your soul? What is that collective energy that makes you get up when that alarm clock goes off?
That collective energy comes from the SSB method, and that's one of my core pillars within the SeeLink, and that is spirit, soul, and body. I believe that we are trichotomous beings and not dichotomous beings. Much of the world is living on the tangent, in my perspective, especially the West, of being dichotomous beings, where we operate from our soul, our mind, will, and emotions, and our body, but not our trichotomous being, spirit, soul, and body. And I believe, it is my conviction and my belief that we have been created in the image of God, in his nature and his likeness, to fulfill our purpose on the earth, our DNA of design. And what gets me up in the morning is that infusion of the breath of God, of the Spirit of God, to realize that I have a mission and I only have a vial of time, because one of the greatest gifts that you and I have, that we have, that we can't get back, even after this podcast, in this moment of spending time with you and spending time with our audience, is this precious gift of time. And we only have a vial of time. We don't know how long that time is going to be, but that fire that gets me up in the morning is that infusion from God's Spirit, from God, who my higher power is, which is Christ, and that infusion of my belief that I'm here for a purpose to inspire and to scatter seed amongst the world through YouTube creation, through podcast creation, through public speaking. And what a great gift that we have in this world wide web, in this generation, in this time in history, right now that we're living in, Joe. And I know that you know this as well. Many of our audience, we have an opportunity that no other generation has had. We have access to technology. We have access to the system called the World Wide Web, something that one of our founding fathers of the World Wide Web and of the computer, one of my heroes as well, Alan Turing, made famous by the movie The Imitation Game, of code breaking the Nazi code during World War II. If Alan Turing was alive today, I think his mind would be blown at how far this has come. What an opportunity. I just want to say that what an opportunity for you and I to invest our seed, because that's a principle of the scriptures, a principle of the Bible, a principle of the law of sowing and reaping, because the law of sowing and reaping is non-optional without cause and effect. When I sow and you sow, when our audience sows the DNA of their design to something, there's always going to be a reaping of that harvest.
You know, I think about that in all the episodes of Joe Rogan that I've listened to. He always talks about how this is a level of a golden age of all of these things that we get to experience technologically. I mean, we come from the same generation, and I think about the modem, the early modems and the early programs and the early ideas that Gates and Jobs and all these guys had, and how it's become kind of a Jetsons like show now. Like we're literally doing FaceTime, we're doing all these incredible things with technology. And it's interesting. We're in this generational period where we've seen the beginnings, the rotary phone, and we've seen what's going on right now. It's incredible. I mean, and to think about all of these ancestors from the beginning that were kind of working on this idea, if they could see it now, it would blow their minds.
Absolutely. And I come from a family and a lineage where my grandfather, one of my real grandfathers, I never got to meet one of my real grandfathers because he passed away when my father was 13 years old. But he was actually had the patent invention of the intercom. So when you go to an office and you press on the button and you speak to get into the building, he had that patent design for the intercom. And
Wow.
so communications is in my family lineage. John Thomas Matthews. That was his name, John Thomas Matthews. My father's name is John Charles Matthews, but John Thomas Matthews. He patented that invention of the intercom. So communication to me means so much to me. It's in my DNA. It literally is in my DNA, because that's where my grandfather was pointed towards. That's where my father, his background in 40 years being in the telecom world, and then myself, I carried that torch on in sales, but then beyond into selling something in a different way, which is ideas, which is communication, which is inspiring, which is speaking to audiences. And that's what excites me, is this open door that you and I have, that we have, to be able to share our unique DNA of design. And here's a scientific, throw down some practicality and facts, because I always like to come with some practicality as well. Audience, you're listening to me and Joe right now. Close your eyes and realize this reality, that down to the cellular level, there is nobody else like you in the world. There is nobody else 100% like who you are on this planet. Nobody ever was, ever is, and ever will be. AI and cloning can do somewhat of cloning people and cloning personalities, but not 100%. It cannot be done 100%. And you are a unique diadem, a jewel in this world, and you have a purpose to share.
So, of all of the people that you've spoken to and motivated and influenced, what's been one of your best fan letters, best responses you've gotten?
Mm. One of the best responses from motivating audiences. Well, I'd have to say I'm gonna have to go to Tanzania. It's very hard to choose, but when I was in Tanzania, Africa, it's a twofold part. And I'll be really quick with the elevator pitch here on this, and that is speaking to a audience that many of them had never seen a white person before in a village. Went out to a remote village in Tanzania with the Maasai people. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the Maasai people, they're warriors. They're warriors in the modern age, but still with that ancient background. And these warriors have ear piercings. They've got their spears. They still have their outfits. And they part of becoming a Maasai warrior is that you have to go into the wilderness and kill a lion without gunpowder, without guns, but with a spear. That's how you become a Maasai warrior. So I got to speak with my brother when we were in one of the villages in 2010 during the FIFA World Cup that was in South Africa. The whole continent was just on
Yeah.
fire for excitement during the World Cup. And even though Tanzania didn't have their team in the World Cup, they were still eager to cheer them on. So I went to this village with my brother, translator. We get there, everything is primitive mud huts, Maasai warrior, many people who hadn't seen a white person. The response from the audience when they saw me and they heard my message of the main thing that humbled me, Joe, was the children wanted to reach out and touch my face to realize, like Avatar, it's like, are you real?
Uh-huh.
Like, I've never seen a white person. Are you real? That response of you're flesh and blood, but you're foreign to me because I haven't seen this. That to me brought me down at a human level of this is humbling. That the paths that intersect that really just blows your mind. But being in that place and with them in 2010 during the World Cup of Soccer, you'd have all the primitive huts, all the primitive outfits, and then you'd have the convention center that we'd go to in a modern building, and you had the 30-inch TV screen, their Samsung TV screen, where they still watch the World Cup. That to me was just humbling. Between that and speaking on the after the 7 o'clock news on the Tanzania radio in the capital city to seven different provinces and several million people, that to me was a response that wow, the just the variety from small village
Yeah.
Maasai warriors to several provinces after the 7 o'clock radio. That to me was impactful responses for sure.
That's incredible. So let me ask you this. If you had a dream tonight, ran to the 18-year-old version of you, you walked into the room, you had like this big book, coffee table book, and you handed it to that young version and said, that's how your life turned out. Would that version of you believe it?
Hmm. I would say yes and no. I would say because as an 18-year-old up to that point, my life had already been unconventional in many ways. But I think it's hard for our human minds to comprehend, especially at a young age, really all the twists and all the mountains and the valleys and the journeys. I would say yes and no. Some of it I would say yes, I could see that. Others I would say, well, I just I can't imagine how that would have turned out. And I think that's the great adventure. I believe that's the great adventure, that there are things that we expect that happen, and then there are things that are unexpected that happen. And part of being in our pocket, being in our DNA of design, fulfilling our unique purpose is being able to pivot and being able to shift and reinvent ourselves on the fly. That's what every great entrepreneur is supposed to do. I would say, in answer to your question, yes and no. Yes, I would believe some of it, and no, I'll be like, okay, I just couldn't see that happening. But the mystery and the adventure of just taking it all in and being content with whatever state I am in. That's what I'd say to my 18-year-old self. Be content to the state that you are in. And oddly enough, that's one of the words one of my late mentors shared with me around that time was, be content with the state that you're in moving forward in your life as you grow up, because you're going to go into many different highs and lows, many different places of being. Be content with the state that you're in. Enjoy the journey and don't be overly focused on the finish line.
So, of everything that you've done in your life, this evolution, this very interesting, both geographical, personal, and professional trail that you've been on, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
I'm proudest of the fact that throughout all of it, that I've not denied my conscience. Because in the great words of Martin Luther, when he said this, he said, "To deny conscience is neither right nor safe. I can do no other. I cannot deny my conscience." And what I'm most proud of is that through my journey as an entrepreneur, as a homeschooler, as a public speaker, as a dream interpreter, as one in the corporate world and a digital nomad, through all the highs and lows and all the adventures that I have, to the best of my human capabilities and my imperfections, I have kept my conscience. I have not sold out. I've not sold out to the conformity, because that's what the word conform, there's form and then there's con. And it is my perspective that one of the greatest con jobs in the world today is this peer pressure of conformity to form into an image that somebody else says you have to reach in order to be successful. I am most proud of that I have not sold my soul or denied my conscience.
So everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, everyone that sees you speak, everyone that you work with and know, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Who I believe I am is somebody that is born to lead people towards a awakening and alignment with who they've been created to be. Who I am is an exhorter. That's my primary DNA of design, my gifting, to exhort, to inspire, to encourage, to uplift people, to come into alignment. Like it's I like to use the analogy of the divine chiropractor, the spiritual chiropractor. All of us have a spine in life that we need to have aligned. And for me, who I am is to help people see the link. That's why my brand's called SeeLink, to link their alignment, to come into divine alignment with their purpose on the earth, and to be exhorted in that, no matter what culture, no matter what nation, no matter what gender, no matter what background, no matter what nationality. That is my purpose and my DNA of design to encourage people to reach that purpose, their unique purpose. That's who I am, no matter what other people say. And one of the things I've had to bump up against in my life is especially the over familiar thing where people say, "Oh, well, what makes you so unique and so special?" And my response to that is, because I have a unique design, as do you. And those who want to go on this journey with me, go with me. And those who do not, some people will love the message and some people won't, and that's okay. It's okay to leave people in the dust. And I don't say that out of arrogance or anything. I just say that to encourage people in your profession and your purpose and your design. It is okay to leave people in the dust, even ones that maybe have familiarity and family blood, maybe people who have been friends of yours for years, but you reach a certain climactic point where you're going one way and they're going another, and that's fine. But we only have so much time on the earth, and that's the reason. That's the reason for me.
So, Caleb, if you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see one event in human history with your own eyes, it wouldn't create a tear in time. Nothing weird would happen. You would just get to witness it happen. What would you love to have seen with your own eyes?
Mm. I would say I'd have to go back into the timeline and go down into one of the great showdowns of biblical history, and that would be the confrontation between Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, of one of the great stories from the Bible, where Elijah is like this hero that you read of, like in the Marvel comics, where he's the last prophet standing, he's the last voice, and every other voice and every other false prophet or false voice are the prophets of Asher, the prophets of Baal. And there's this power encounter on Mount Carmel where Elijah says to the people of Israel, "Choose this day whom you will serve." And there's this power confrontation between the one voice and then the Thanos army, so to speak, to use the Marvel comic books of the prophets of Baal and Asher. And there's this power encounter for the soul of the nation, for the soul of the people. And then, of course, for those who are familiar with the story, I'll just go through it quickly again. Elijah prays and calls down fire. The prophets of Baal and Asherah try to call down fire. They fail. Elijah succeeds. And Elijah says, "God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, let it be known this day who art God in the land of Israel and in the world." And so fire falls on the sacrifice, and everything else is history. But to be there to see a pillar of fire fall on a sacrifice and to see a power encounter between light and darkness, to me, that would be pretty cool to
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, for sure. So if anybody wants to dig into the SeeLink, they want to ask you questions, hire you, see you speak any of the good business, where do they go?
YouTube, my YouTube channel at the SeeLink, so TheSeelink at the SeeLink. That's my YouTube channel where I've got motivational, complimentary, inspiring content to help you see the link in your day by day and in the dreams and mysteries of the night season. I post on there weekly. There's no cost whatsoever. It's free motivational content. So if you're listening to this today and you're like, Caleb, I love what you shared on Joe's show, I want you to hit subscribe on at the SeeLink. Follow me there. Follow me as well on www.calebmatthews.net. I've got archives of past podcasts and YouTube teaching content and much more. And you can check me out there and you can get directed to amazing podcasts such as this, because one of the things I always love to do with those who have me on their show, such as Joe, thank you so much, Joe, for having me today, is to feature their podcast, to feature who they are and drive traffic back towards other podcasters because we're in this journey together. But you can find me in those two places primarily, YouTube at the SeeLink, and of course my SeeLink brand website, www.calebmatthews.net.
Okay, we will put all these links in the show notes, and hopefully the next time I see you, you're on the Joe Rogan show.
I'll be thinking about my conversation with Joe Dimino on the Joe Rogan show. I'll be like, Joe, do you know this guy called Joe Dimino? I think you and him should meet after the show.
There we go. Absolutely. We'll create the daisy chain. I love it.
Yeah.
Caleb, thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your passion, for your light. This has been an absolute honor. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. And I will definitely make sure that I give you a nice 5-star review. If you could do the same for me, I'd love that to feature you and your testimonial on the website. And until next time, thank you very much for having me on the show.
Yes, sir. Thank you.